Well, hey there, it's that coding guy here. Today we're going to talk about functions. You may hear functions referred to as methods as well, and by and large, those two terms are interchangeable in programming. And so let's talk about what a method or a function actually does and the benefits of them. The main benefit of functions is that it takes one or usually several lines of code that are somehow related, and it ties them together in one block. And that block then is assigned a name, so we can basically call a whole bunch of code and have it run just by referring to it by a name. And that means we can write the code one time, but we can reuse it anytime that we need it just by calling its name. And that means we write the code once. There is less of a chance of us making a mistake if we had copied and pasted a whole bunch of code all over the place. If we ever have to change the steps inside that method, we can just do it in one spot and it gets propagated to all other places to actually use it. And so it makes our code much easier to reason about when we take complex steps and we break them into functions. It's easier for us to think about, it's easier for others to think about when they're reading our code and things like that. So it's a fundamental skill to learn, and let's dig into it. So I have a couple of integers here in my main method, and I would like to add those together. So I'd like to define a method that adds those together and returns the result. The thing I see folks struggle with a whole bunch when they're first learning programming in any language is kind of understanding what a method or a function blueprint is. Like, how do we actually define the method? In Java, as a type-safe language, it's very rigid. And so we basically are going to provide it the same things in the same order every single time. So once we kind of learn the anatomy of how to define a function, it's going to help us a long way to whenever we see a function to understand what those different pieces are. So the first one we're actually not going to talk about too much here. It's the first thing you can define is the access modifier for a function. And that's something that we can either research on our own or maybe talk about in a future video. For now, just know public is going to make this usable wherever we need it. We also at the moment need to make this static, and unfortunately that's another keyword and topic for another time. For now, just know that we need to make this static because this is static, and we're going to move on from that, right? The next thing in the method definition is the return type of the method. So with Java being one of those type-safe languages, it's strongly typed, we need to tell it what the return type of our method is. So methods return one thing, whether that is one collection of things or just one thing. They either return a thing or they don't. Now, this one up here doesn't return anything, so its type is void. This is actually a method, right? So I want to add two integers together, and the sum of two integers is an integer. So I'd like to see a return type of int for this method. The next thing is the name of the method. And it's important to make these as verbose as they need to be. And I generally like to see method names as verbs because they're performing some work for us. They're doing an action. So for this, I'd like this to be add two numbers. The next thing that comes in the method definition is the parameter list. So in order for a function to do its job, it needs to take input. And I think that's one of the things that we can use to reason about functions is they're kind of a box. You're going to put some stuff into the box and you're going to get stuff out. So in order to add two numbers, we need to stuff two numbers into this box. So method definitions in Java need they need data types for their parameters. So we need the first number and we need the second number. And those are separated by commas. And you can have as many parameters as you need in order to get the work done inside the method. After that, we're going to open a code block. And methods can have one line of code or 30 or 100 lines of code or more. It's best to keep them fairly short. 30 or 50 lines, I think, is probably a good thing. We're definitely not going to go anywhere near that in this lesson. And already, it's already mad at me. You know, that compiler, those red squiggles are getting mad at you, right? And if I hover over this, it tells me that it's missing a return statement. So I like to think of a method definition as a contract. We promised. We said, Java, the return type of this method is an integer. We're going to get an integer out of this thing. And right now, we're not doing anything yet. So what we could do is define a integer and set the value equal to the sum of first and second, right? So we could do something like int sum is equal to first plus second. Oops. And then the keyword to actually get this thing out of the function box is called return. So we would return sum. Now, this is fairly confusing at first for many people because, all right, we've got first and second here, but that has nothing to do, that's different than these guys, right? And so one of the important things to understand about a method definition is that these parameters are just ways to refer to whatever we pass into it inside the method itself. And that seems weird because we haven't really talked about calling it yet. I think that'll make more sense in a second. So it's also important to understand that this does not do anything on its own. All we have done is defined a method box. And until we actually stuff two numbers into it, it's not going to do anything. We actually have to say, hey, function, do your job for me. And that is referred to as many things. You could say, we're going to call the function, we're going to invoke the function, we're going to use the function. So a lot of overloaded terminology there. All those things mean the same thing. So the cool thing about the function is we defined this, outside of our main method, but now we can use it inside the main method. And so to use it or invoke it or call it, we use the name of the method. And as soon as I start typing it, IntelliSense is already saying, oh, hey, did you mean add two numbers? I know about add two numbers. And I could either continue typing this or I could hit tab on my keyboard to accept that. It's like, all right, I'm ready. What do you want? I'm ready for int first. Give me an integer. And so I could say, hey, all right, how about 1? All right. And then comma, 2. Actually, I'm going to make these different. I'm going to make this 10 and 20. if I could type correctly. And then every method call or invocation has to end with a semicolon because this is a statement. So that's it. That's add two numbers. And it's common to be confused because you're like, well, down here you had to provide the data type. So like, why isn't this right? Why is this not working, right? So the data types are only needed in the method definition. When we actually invoke it or call it, all we need to do are provide the values. Now, confusingly, if we run this, right, we're not actually seeing anything because we didn't actually print anything to the console, and we didn't assign this result to a variable, so we can't use that later. So basically, we're having Java do this, add them together, and then just into the void. All right, you added them, it existed in memory for a second, and then the program ends. So what we could do is print this out. We could, and there's a number of ways we could do this. We could say int sum is equal to add two numbers, and then we could print out sum. And when we run that guy, we get the result of 10 plus 20. And so the way that works, right, is when we invoke the method, we pass 10 as the first value, and that is the value then that this variable holds when we come into the method. The second value in the parameter list goes into the second value here, variable here, and that's the value that variable holds in the method. So when we come in, 10 is in first, 20 is in second. Those get summed and returned. Now this method works, and this is fairly representative of beginner code. We can improve this slightly, and because we don't really do anything with sum other than just return it, we don't actually have to stick this result into a variable in order to return it. We could simply return the results of first plus second. And now, if we rerun this, we still get 30. Okay? What we just did is a technical term you may hear called refactoring. We had some working code and we refactored it. We changed it around a little bit to make it more effective or more optimal. So we just refactored that method. And similarly, we don't actually need to stick the result of this into a variable in order to print it out, because this now, what we get out the other side, this evaluates to a number. And because it evaluates to a number, because it returns that number, this we could just stick into, oops, I forgot to copy. We could just stick that in there, and now we're printing out the result of this method call. And if I run this again, we're going to get the same value of 30 there. So we just refactored our code a little bit to make it more optimal. So we practice doing this with straight up values, but we could also pass in variables instead. So we could add first number to the second number here and get 21, right? That's 20 plus the value in first number. Or, we could pass second number in here. So now we're adding the value of first number to the value of second number, right? We would expect to get 3 out of here. So that's a little bit on methods. So yeah, that's the thing. These method definitions, they're the same every time. You've got the public access modifier. Generally, you won't have static too much, but then you've got the return type and the name of the actual method, and then its parameter list with data types. And then remember, this doesn't do anything on its own. We actually have to call it and invoke it. Say, hey, do that trick you know how to do. Do your thing. Here's the input that you need. Do it. And we're going to get something out the other end. And so as we said, we can use this all over the place. Now that I've got add two numbers, I can do whatever I want with it. So I'll actually copy this guy a few times. I can, do whatever I want. Well, I can't pass it 3 numbers, though, right? Because add 2 numbers cannot be applied to int. It doesn't know what int is. It only knows what int is. And similarly, I couldn't pass it just 1 number. Int can't be applied to int. So, and of course we would have to print all of these out as well. But this is the value of those of the method, and it doesn't necessarily probably make a lot of sense now because there's only 1 line of code in here. But if this was 30 lines of code and we were using it all over the place, man, that's efficiency right there. And so we can define as many methods as we like. We could have subtract 2 numbers. And basically all we would have to change here is that. And now if we wanted to subtract a couple of numbers, we could call that. And actually maybe we want to print it out to the console. And so we could do 10 and 4. And if we run that guy, we get add 2 numbers first, and then we get subtract 2 numbers. So we get 10 minus 4 is 6. And similarly, we could do a multiply 2 numbers. And use the asterisk here for multiply. Multiply 2 numbers, 10 times 4. Sounds like 40 to me. Right? And so we could do these, we can call these methods now in any order we want, as many times as we want. And that's the ticket there. So practice defining your own methods, practice calling them and understanding the difference. Try to look at the method definition and pick apart its pieces. Remember, those methods, they all have the same anatomy. They've got the parameter list, they've got the name of the method, they've got the return type, some type of access modifier, and that. So there's your introduction to methods. Cheers.